The proximity alarm didn't sound like an emergency. It sounded precise. A single tone. Flat. Controlled. Final. Captain Elias Varn was lean in the way that deep space commanders tend to become after years of long corridors and longer silences. Economical in his movements. Unhurried in his speech. With gray eyes that had watched the outer reaches of Coalition space pass by viewport after viewport, and come back from all of it neither frightened nor particularly impressed. He had the kind of stillness that made junior officers nervous, because they could never quite tell whether he was thinking or simply waiting for the universe to catch up to a conclusion he had already reached. He didn't look up immediately when the alarm sounded. He finished adjusting the cup in his hand, aligning it with the edge of the console the way he always did, parallel to the panel seam, equidistant from both sides, as if the exact placement mattered in some way that had nothing to do with the cup and everything to do with the man holding it. It was a habit his crew had long since stopped questioning. Only then did he lift his gaze toward the forward display. Report. No urgency. No raised voice. Just the single word, dropped into the silence of the bridge like a stone into still water, not disturbing it, just marking the surface. Across the bridge, the tactical officer was already speaking, his words arriving half a second behind the data cascading across his screen. Contact confirmed. Multiple signatures. No, correction, 23 vessels. All dropping out of faster-than-light travel simultaneously. A pause. Then, quieter, the kind of quiet that comes when a trained officer processes something that genuinely unsettles him and decides to present it as information rather than alarm. They're forming a perimeter. The main display resolved. Ships. Not scattered. Not drifting. Positioned. 23 warships, each one holding a precise angle, locking into a containment pattern so geometrically clean it looked as though someone had calculated it weeks in advance. Not a formation assembled in the field, but a design executed with the confidence of absolute preparation. The formation closed in layers. Outer ring at maximum weapons range. Inner ring at optimal targeting distance. Cross-vector coverage eliminating every plausible escape trajectory before it could be identified, let alone attempted. The mathematics of it were almost beautiful. Almost. Origin. Varn asked. Coalition fleet. All 23. No mixed signatures. That got a few heads to turn on the bridge. Not fear in their faces. Something more precise than fear. Recognition. The coalition didn't deploy like this unless the outcome had already been decided long before the ships arrived. They're broadcasting, the comms officer said. Standard enforcement channel. Put it through. The voice that came over the speakers carried the particular weight of an institution that had not been seriously challenged in a very long time. Calm. Absolute. With centuries of uncontested authority compressed beneath every syllable like geological pressure under stone. Unidentified vessel. You have entered restricted corridor space under coalition authority. You are surrounded by 23 active warships. Power down immediately and prepare for boarding. Silence settled over the bridge. Not heavy, not tense, just waiting. The silence of a crew that had learned to take their cue from one man, and that man had not yet given it. Varn glanced once more at the formation on the display. 23 ships. Perfect geometry. No gaps. No hesitation in their positioning. The quiet confidence of a force that had never had a reason to doubt its own math. He nodded slightly, as if confirming something to himself that he had suspected from the moment the first sensor contact registered. Not surprise. Verification. Then he set his cup down. Navigation, he said. How long until they expect compliance? A brief scan of the data. 10 seconds, sir. Good. He leaned back into his chair, slowly, deliberately, and gave the forward display his full and unhurried attention. On the screen, the coalition fleet tightened its perimeter by a fraction. An adjustment so small it would pass entirely unnoticed by anyone who didn't know exactly what they were looking for. Varn noticed. Of course he did. Open a channel, he said. The bridge waited. The timer in the corner ticked down. 9 seconds. 8. 7. Varn spoke before it reached 5. Coalition command, he said, his voice even, almost conversational. The tone of a man who might be discussing navigational charts over a meal rather than addressing 23 warships with weapons locked. Before we continue, there's something you should understand. A pause. Not for effect. For certainty. We're not the ones trapped here. On the bridge of the Coalition flagship Ardent Spear, Commander Tyron registered the anomaly before he understood what he was looking at. Tyron was exactly the kind of officer the Coalition produced in its finest decades, broad-shouldered, economical in his speech, with 18 years of deep space command behind him and the particular calm that develops in men who have learned to trust their instruments absolutely. He had been in 3 major fleet engagements. He had commanded the successful containment of the Valari incursion at the Keth Corridor, an engagement that was still used in Coalition tactical academies as a case study in efficient force application. He was not a man who second-guessed his instruments, and he was not a man who felt unease without being able to assign it a source. Right up until this moment, that had never been a problem. "Rerun that scan," he said. He didn't raise his voice. The request alone was enough to send 3 officers rechecking their data in parallel. "It's already been verified twice," the sensor analyst replied. "Running a 3rd pass now." On the main display, the lone vessel sat at the exact center of the containment formation. It hadn't moved. It hadn't powered weapons. It hadn't attempted communication beyond that single statement. And yet something about it was deeply, fundamentally wrong. A wrongness that Tyron could feel as a pressure in his chest before any of his instruments had found the language to describe it. "Zoom the hull," he said. The image sharpened. For a moment, nothing stood out. Just another deep space vessel. Dark plating, minimal reflective surfaces, structurally intact. The kind of ship that could pass unremarked in a busy transit lane. Then the perspective shifted slightly as the imaging systems found their optimal angle. "Hold that angle." The analyst froze the frame. Tyron leaned forward in his chair, and something happened in his expression that his bridge crew had never seen before and would spend considerable time afterward trying to describe accurately. Not alarm, not confusion. Something more like the expression of a man who has just picked up an object he expected to be light and found it immovable. "That can't be correct." "It is," the analyst said quietly. "We adjusted for parallax distortion. That's the actual structure. The hull wasn't symmetrical, not slightly misaligned, not the minor variance that accumulated through standard manufacturing tolerances or field repairs. Deliberately, intentionally, structurally uneven. One side extended farther than the other in a pattern that suggested neither damage nor modular attachment. The mass distribution appeared. There was no other word that fit, irrational. Wrong in a way that exceeded accident and entered the territory of decision. "Structural integrity?" Tyron asked. "According to our models, it shouldn't hold under sustained thrust. The stress distribution across the asymmetric frame should produce cascading microfractures within the first hour of high-velocity travel." "And yet it's here," Tyron said. "Yes, sir." A second officer spoke from the adjacent console, his voice carrying the careful flatness of someone reporting something he himself had verified 3 times before accepting. "Energy readings are inconsistent." Tyron didn't turn. "Define inconsistent." "They're not stabilizing. Output is fluctuating across multiple frequency bands simultaneously. It's not a spike or a surge, it's continuous variation. Rhythmic, almost. Like a ship that is permanently in the process of doing something rather than simply running its systems." "Power instability?" "No, sir." A pause. The officer chose his next word with visible care. "It's too controlled for that." Tyron finally looked over. "Controlled instability?" he repeated. He said it the way you say something that doesn't make grammatical sense, but that you understand perfectly. "That's the closest model match we have. But it doesn't align with any known energy architecture, coalition, registered alien, or otherwise. Our database has no category for what this is doing." On another section of the bridge, targeting systems were attempting to map firing solutions. The tactical officer's voice, when it came, had the particular flatness of someone who had decided the most professional response to impossible information was to present it without editorial. "Commander, we're having difficulty locking predictive trajectories." Tyron's gaze shifted slightly. "The ship isn't moving." "Yes, sir." "Then why can't we model it?" "Because the system keeps generating multiple valid solutions at once. It's as if the ship could occupy any of several positions simultaneously. The targeting AI cannot collapse to a single dominant probability. It keeps running the calculation and returning a range instead of an answer." "That's not possible." "No, sir." Tyron exhaled slowly through his nose. a gesture so subtle that only the officers closest to him would have recognized it as anything other than routine breathing. Across the bridge, the quiet had changed. It was no longer routine. It was attentive, the focused, suspended attention of trained professionals who had been very good at their jobs for a long time and had just encountered something that made that goodness feel insufficient. "Bring up registry data," he ordered. The system complied. "Unidentified vessel. No confirmed match in Coalition database. Partial correlation with human fleet signatures, but configuration does not align with any registered class, variant, or experimental designation." Tyron frowned slightly. "Human. Probable origins, sir." "But," the analyst hesitated. "But what?" "It doesn't match their design philosophy. Human ships are unconventional by Coalition standards, but they follow their own engineering logic consistently. Even their experimental configurations show recognizable patterns. This ship doesn't follow any logic we can identify." Tyron's eyes narrowed slightly as he held the image on the display. Every species in known space followed patterns. Not identical patterns, but recognizable ones. Design logic converged over time. Efficiency demanded it. Survival enforced it. You could look at a ship from any of the 12 registered spacefaring civilizations and trace the thread of reasoning that had produced its shape, its material choices, its weapons placement. Even the most radical design departures were departures from something identifiable. This ship did not have that thread. "Weapon systems?" Tyron asked. "Detected, but placement is deeply irregular. They're positioned at non-standard angles. Some of them appear to deliberately interfere with each other's firing arcs. That would create blind spots." "Yes, sir. By our calculations, significant ones." Tyron watched the display for another second. "Map those blind spots." The tactical officer complied. A web of projected vulnerability zones appeared around the ship, areas where, according to Coalition targeting logic, the vessel would be structurally exposed to incoming fire. Tyron studied them carefully. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he shook his head slightly. "No, sir. That's too obvious. A ship that has done nothing accidentally up to this point doesn't have accidentally obvious blind spots." The officer hesitated. "You believe the vulnerabilities are intentional. I believe nothing about this ship is accidental. Not the asymmetry, not the energy variance, not the weapon placement, and not those blind spots." He paused. "Which means whatever is in those spaces is exactly what they want us targeting." Another system chimed. "Shield configuration detected," the analyst said. Tyron turned back. "Well, it doesn't have a fixed boundary." Silence. "Repeat that." "The defensive layer isn't forming a stable perimeter. It's shifting." "Adaptive shielding?" "No, sir. Adaptive systems still follow response timing. They react to incoming threats within measurable intervals. Even the most advanced adaptive architecture has a detection delay. This." The analyst paused, his hands moving over the interface in the particular way they moved when he was searching for a framework that didn't exist yet. "It changes before it's engaged. The shield adjusts to an attack before the attack has been launched, before we have even completed the decision to fire." Tyron didn't speak for a moment. On the display, the lone ship remained exactly where it had been since arrival. No movement, no aggression, no attempt to escape. Surrounded by 23 warships capable of reducing it to dispersed particles and doing nothing. Just waiting, with the patience of something that had decided patience was not a concession but a strategy. And somehow, impossibly, that patience felt more threatening than any weapons-locked Tyron had ever faced. "Commander," the communications officer said carefully, "they haven't responded to the enforcement directive." Tyron didn't look away from the screen. "They already did," he said. A brief silence. "Sir, that statement earlier. We're not the ones trapped here." He let the words settle before continuing. "That was their response. They answered the directive before we finished delivering it." He held the thought for a moment, turning it over the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. "Run threat analysis," he ordered. The system processed. 3 seconds. 5. 7. Unable to produce reliable outcome, the AI returned. Tyron's jaw tightened slightly. "Reason? Insufficient predictive model." That had never happened before. Not once. Not in 18 years of command. Not in 3 major engagements. Not in any classified encounter logged in the Coalition's accumulated tactical database. which stretched back across centuries of interstellar conflict and contained the documented record of every weapons system, every defensive configuration, and every species variation the Coalition had ever encountered. There were always outcomes, even terrible ones, even impossible ones, even outcomes that gave the enemy a 97% probability of victory. The engine still generated them, because the engine had a model for everything. This time, nothing. The engine had no answer because it had no model, and it had no model because what it was looking at had never existed before in anything the Coalition had encountered or imagined. The display remained unchanged. One ship, 23 surrounding it. Every tactical advantage clearly defined. Every variable apparently accounted for. And yet, no answer from the machine that had never been silent before. Tyron leaned back slightly, his eyes fixed on the vessel at the center of his formation. He felt something move through him that he couldn't find a proper designation for. Something that lived in the space between professional humility and genuine, quiet dread. He had commanded fleets for 18 years, and he was not a man who admitted to being afraid. But he was a man who was honest with himself about what his instruments told him. And what his instruments were telling him right now was that he was looking at something that the Coalition's 18-year, centuries-backed, galaxy-spanning body of knowledge had no language for. "Maintain position," he said. "Yes, sir. No one fires until I give the order." The bridge acknowledged in unison. Quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. This one had weight. This one pressed gently against everything. Because for the first time in a very long time, the Coalition was looking at something it did not understand. And the longer that understanding refused to arrive, the more dangerous that single, motionless, patient ship at the center of everything continued to feel. Commander Tyron didn't rush the decision that came next. That, more than anything else on the bridge, told his officers how seriously he was taking what they were facing. In 18 years, they had watched him respond to crisis at speed, had seen him issue commands in the seconds between detection and impact, had watched him make decisions while data was still resolving. The fact that he was taking his time now, that he was sitting with this rather than moving through it, was its own kind of signal. But he had thought about it long enough. He had a predictive model that couldn't produce an outcome, a ship that defied structural logic, and an enemy who had answered a directive before it was finished. He also had 23 warships at his disposal, 18 years of command experience, and a career built on the principle that when analysis failed, controlled force provided clarity. He was still a Coalition commander, and Coalition commanders did not sit indefinitely in the face of the unknown. "Final verification," he said. "All systems aligned," Tactical replied. "Weapons locked. Firing solutions stable across all vectors." Tyron gave a small nod. On the main display, the unknown ship remained exactly where it had been since the beginning, centered, still, silent, waiting the way things wait when they are not afraid of what's coming. "Begin with a controlled strike," Tyron ordered. 3 ships. Cross-vector engagement. Standard output. "Let's establish what we're dealing with before we commit further resources." Acknowledgements moved through the formation. 3 Coalition warships shifted position by fractions, barely perceptible adjustments that brought their firing arcs into perfect alignment. The geometry was textbook. 3 simultaneous beams from vectors separated by 120 degrees, converging on a single impact point, creating a pressure triangle with no viable deflection path. Standard doctrine. Proven in 700 years of engagements across 12 civilizations. Proven against everything the Coalition had ever encountered. Targets acquired. Solutions locked. Firing on your command. Tyron didn't look away from the screen. Fire. The void lit up. 3 concentrated energy beams cut across space in perfect synchronization, converging on the center point where the unknown vessel waited. The strike was clean, precise, calculated to overwhelm any standard defense system before it could adapt, before it could reroute, before it could process the threat that was already arriving. On impact, the explosion bloomed exactly as expected. White light expanded outward, flooding sensor arrays, distorting visual feeds, filling the forward display with the bright, familiar geometry of a successful strike. For a moment, the ship disappeared completely, consumed entirely by the intensity of 3 simultaneous weapons discharges. Several officers exhaled. Not relief. Confirmation. The specific, quiet satisfaction that comes when the universe behaves the way training and experience taught you it would. That should be sufficient, one of them murmured. Tyron said nothing. He was watching the readings with a focus so complete it had narrowed his world to the data returning on a single screen. Recalibrating sensors, the analyst reported. Stand by. The light began to fade. Data returned in fragments. First noise, then partial structure, then the ship, still there, not drifting, not breaking apart, not even displaced from its original position by a single measurable unit. Sitting exactly where it had been before 3 warships had delivered a coordinated strike sufficient to disable a standard vessel 3 times its apparent mass. The bridge went completely silent. The kind of silence that is not merely an absence of sound but an active presence, a silence with weight and temperature that presses against the skin and makes the ventilation system seem suddenly very loud. Damage report, Tyron said. The analyst didn't answer immediately. Report, Tyron repeated. And this time there was something new in his voice. Not panic, not anger, but a specific, controlled edge that his crew recognized as the sound Tyron made when he was managing something he hadn't managed before. I don't have one, sir. Explain. There's no structural degradation. No hull breach. No energy bleed from damaged systems. The analyst's voice lowered as if volume itself felt inappropriate in the face of what he was reporting. The power signature is higher. A pause that seemed to last considerably longer than it did. Higher, Tyron repeated. Yes, sir. Higher than before we fired. That's not possible. No, sir. The data stabilized fully. The unknown ship's energy output had spiked at the exact moment of impact. And instead of dropping, as every system Tyron had ever encountered dropped after absorbing weapons fire, it continued running above its previous baseline. Stable. Measured. As if the ship had simply been waiting for fuel and had just been given some. Commander, another officer said slowly, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who has decided the facts are strange enough without any editorial. The strike didn't damage it. Tyron didn't respond. The strike was absorbed. That word hung in the air between them like the echo of something that had fallen and couldn't be picked back up. Absorbed. Clarify, Tyron said. The analyst swallowed once before continuing. It was a small, human gesture. The kind of thing you notice in people when they are delivering information they would very much prefer to be wrong about. The incoming energy didn't dissipate across a defensive barrier. It didn't reflect back, and it didn't overload the system and trigger cascading failure. He paused. It was distributed, simultaneously, across the entire structure. Every component, every system, as if the ship doesn't have a single point that bears the impact. As if impact, for this vessel, is simply another form of input. There should be a point of failure, Tyron said. There isn't one, sir. Every system has a limit. Yes, sir. Another pause. Longer this time. This one doesn't behave like it does. On the tactical display, targeting systems were already updating their firing solution models, attempting, with evident difficulty, to adjust for a defensive mechanism that the database had no classification for. Commander, the tactical officer said, and there was tension in his voice now for the first time, our models are adjusting for shield degradation after each strike. But what? There is no degradation. Tyron looked back at the screen. The ship hadn't raised shields in any conventional sense. There was no visible barrier, no flare of energy at the point of impact, no electromagnetic corona of the kind that characterized every known defensive system. It had simply taken everything 3 of his warships could generate and incorporated it. As if the distinction between incoming weapon and internal power source was, for this ship, a matter of perspective. Run a second strike, Tyron said. Sir. Same parameters. Same ships. Same output. The officers exchanged brief glances across the bridge. It wasn't insubordination. It was the involuntary communication of people who are processing the same impossible information simultaneously and arriving at the same uncomfortable conclusion. Then acknowledged. The second wave hit harder. The beams converged with greater intensity, the combined output pushing significantly beyond what most vessels could sustain in a single engagement cycle. The explosion was brighter, longer, more violent. It saturated every forward sensor for 3 full seconds. When the readings returned, the ship was still there, unchanged. and the energy spike, measurably higher than after the first strike. Significantly higher. The absorption curve, plotted against both data points, showed a system that was not merely tolerating incoming fire, but actively optimizing its intake of it. "Commander," the analyst whispered. Tyron didn't ask. He had already arrived at the same word. "We're feeding it," he said. The silence that followed was the most complete Tyron had ever experienced on a working bridge. Because every officer in that room understood exactly what that meant. It meant the tactical logic of the last 10 minutes had been running in the wrong direction. It meant that force, here, was not a weapon. It was a transfer of resources from his fleet to theirs. It meant that the harder they pushed, the more they gave away. All ships, hold fire. Across the formation, weapons systems powered down in near-perfect unison. The void settled. 23 warships. One target. And for the first time, the balance of that equation no longer felt like a mathematical certainty. On the central display, the unknown vessel remained motionless, unharmed, unhurried, as if the attack had been anticipated before the order was given, as if it had been necessary, as if this vessel had needed them to fire and had waited patiently for them to do it. Tyron stared at it for a long second. Then the communication channel activated on its own. No incoming request. No signal detected. Just a voice. Calm. Steady. Exactly as before. "Commander," it said. "That was a reasonable test." A pause. "Now let me show you what you missed." Tyron didn't respond to the voice immediately. He didn't cut the channel either. He held very still, his hands flat on the console, and made a deliberate decision not to react. Because reaction, he was beginning to understand, was the primary resource this ship was designed to harvest. On the display, the unknown vessel finally moved. Not away. Forward. Movement detected. Navigation reported. The sharpness in her voice barely contained now. Vector, directly into the inner ring. Tyron's eyes narrowed. Intercept paths. Calculating, recalculating, she hesitated. "We're getting conflicting solutions again." "That's not an answer. It's the only one the system is giving, sir." The ship accelerated. Not gradually. Not along a predictable trajectory curve. It simply changed position, one moment stationary, the next already in motion, closing distance with a velocity that did not correspond to its mass profile or any known propulsion physics. The transition between stillness and movement happened without the interval that physics required. "That's not possible," someone said under their breath. "No," Tyron replied quietly. "It isn't." "Track it," he ordered. "We are trying, sir." The targeting grid filled with projected trajectories. Dozens of them, all valid, all contradictory, each representing a real possible position and each excluding the others. There was no dominant probability to anchor to. The ship's movement didn't favor any single trajectory strongly enough for the system to select it. "The system is generating multiple future positions simultaneously," Tactical reported, and the tremor that had entered his voice was past concealing now. "They all check out within acceptable parameters. We can't select one. Collapse them. We can't. There's no dominant probability to collapse to." The ship entered the inner perimeter. 3 coalition warships adjusted instantly, positioning themselves to form a close-range kill box with overlapping firing arcs. Standard containment protocol, executed exactly as doctrine required. "Close-range engagement," one captain reported over the fleet channel. "We have it contained." Tyron watched. He didn't believe that. The unknown vessel didn't evade. It didn't dodge in any trajectory that targeting systems could predict and counter. It moved through the formation the way water moves through rock, not by force, but by finding the spaces that already existed. Each adjustment placed it just outside optimal firing angles. Too slight to predict in advance. Too precise to be random. Too consistent to be anything other than deliberate. Every movement arrived in the exact position the targeting systems hadn't finished calculating for yet. Not outrunning them. Not outspeeding them. Arriving, consistently, just ahead of the moment the calculation completed. "Why aren't they firing?" Tyron asked. "They don't have a clean shot," Tactical replied. "Every time they lock, it's already shifted. The firing solution completes and the position is already wrong. By the time the new solution is ready, the position has shifted again. That's impossible at this range." "Yes, sir." On the tactical overlay, firing solutions flickered in and out of existence like something was erasing them. The ship wasn't outrunning the targeting systems. It was arriving just ahead of them, again and again, with the consistency of something that could see the calculations being run and step out of the answer before it was finalized. Return fire, Tyrant ordered. All available vectors. Staggered bursts. Box it in. The formation responded. Multiple ships fired. Not a synchronized volley, but deliberate staggered bursts designed to eliminate the space between solutions, to create a density of incoming fire that the ship could not navigate around. The beams converged. The ship did not retreat. It adjusted, letting 2 shots pass behind it, one beneath it, one grazing past where it had been half a second earlier. Then it fired. Once. A single shot. Not at a ship. At empty space. At a coordinate that appeared to hold no tactical significance, in a direction that was not directly aligned with any vessel in the formation. Miss, someone said automatically. Tyrant didn't agree. Track the impact point. There is no impact, the analyst said. It terminated mid-vector. No registered contact. No. Tyrant said, his voice very quiet now. Watch the formation. 2 coalition ships, positioned on opposite sides of the firing line, reacted at the same instant. Both shifted course, not because they had been struck, because their predictive threat systems had flagged the shot, correctly, according to their models, as a delayed multi-vector dispersion event. Collision avoidance protocols triggered automatically. Both ships moved. The shot had never been aimed at those ships. It had been aimed at their decision-making systems, at the specific input that would produce the specific output of repositioning. They were manipulated, Tyrant said. The repositioning created a gap. Small, temporary, but real. The unknown vessel used it immediately, moving through the opening with a transition that didn't follow inertia the way physics required, arriving on the other side with the unhurried certainty of something that had known the gap would be there before it was created. Then it fired again. This time, the result was immediate. A coalition warship's drive array went dark. No explosion. No visible damage to hull or external structure. No energy discharge that the sensors registered as a weapon impact. Just offline. Systems unresponsive. Power automatically rerouted to secondary functions. The ship alive in every way except its ability to move. Report. Tyrant snapped. Drive systems unresponsive. Power is still routed correctly. Crew is unharmed. No structural breach detected. Cause? We don't know, sir. Another shot. A second ship. Weapons systems gone. Still intact. Still fully operational in every other capacity. Its crew could breathe, communicate, navigate. They simply could not fight. Another shot. Communications array disabled. The ship remained lit, alive, its crew unharmed, and its hull without a mark. But isolated. Cut off from the fleet channel, from coordination, from the collective decision-making of the formation it had sailed with for years. 3 ships. All neutralized. None destroyed. Not a single casualty. The pattern was unmistakable, and it carried a weight that pure destruction never could have. Because destruction ends things. This was something else entirely. They're not destroying targets, Tactical said slowly, feeling his way through the sentence the way you feel your way through a dark room. They're choosing functions, Tyron replied. Specific systems. Specific capabilities. This is not combat. This is editing. And because it was editing, because it was controlled and deliberate and restrained, because it preserved life while precisely removing capability, it meant something far more dangerous than any firepower calculation could represent. It meant they were not fighting to win. They were demonstrating that they could. It meant control. Commander, the analyst said, his voice tightening with something that was past professional concern and approaching something more personal. Their energy readings are spiking again. From what source? A pause. From our own fire. Tyron didn't react outwardly, but his gaze moved, a small, deliberate shift. Explain. The residual energy from missed shots, near passes, partial dissipation at range, it's being redirected. Into their systems. All of it. They don't need us to hit them directly. They're still absorbing it. Yes, sir. But we're not hitting them. We don't have to, the analyst said. And there was something in his voice that wasn't quite fear, but was as close to it as a trained analyst would allow himself to come on a working bridge. Any energy discharged in their vicinity feeds them. We could power them with our missed shots alone. That was new. That changed the equation in a direction Tyron had not anticipated. He looked back at the screen. The unknown vessel was moving again, deeper into the formation now, positioning itself precisely in the region of highest crossfire density. Not avoiding the most dangerous area, seeking it, moving toward where the most fire would naturally concentrate, because the most fire meant the most energy. They're using us, Tyron said quietly. No one disagreed. There was nothing to disagree with. The formation was no longer acting as a unified system. Each ship was reacting individually, adjusting its position, compensating for the movements of neighbors, recalculating on its own logic. And in doing so, every ship was contributing to the fragmentation that the unknown vessel needed. Every individual correction made the collective less coherent. "Commander, we are losing formation cohesion," Tactical said. "I can see that. Recommend regroup and reset to a tighter perimeter." Tyron didn't answer immediately. On the display, 3 of his ships drifted, alive, intact, their crews unhurt. The unknown vessel had already moved past them, not finishing them, not acknowledging them any further. They had served their purpose in whatever this was, and had been set aside. "They're not here to destroy us," Tyron said. "No, sir." He held that thought. Let it settle fully. Let it become something he could work with. "They're showing us something. A silence, longer than the others. The kind of silence that precedes understanding. Not the comfortable understanding of confirmation, but the uncomfortable understanding of revision. Because everyone on that bridge was beginning to understand what that meant. And understanding it meant recognizing that they had been, from the very first moment, in a different engagement than the one they thought they were fighting. The unknown vessel slowed. Just slightly. Just enough to be noticed. Then it stopped. Right in the middle of what remained of the formation. Exactly where it had started. As if everything that had just happened, the absorbed strikes, the disabled ships, the fragmented formation, the demonstration of a weapons logic that coalition doctrine had no response to, had been a lesson structured from beginning to end, delivered at exactly the pace the teacher had chosen. As if this had always been a classroom. And the lesson had just concluded. The communication channel opened again. No signal detected. No request logged. Same voice. "Commander," it said, "your systems are very efficient." A pause. Predictable. Tyron held the moment. He felt something move in his chest that he spent a long time afterward being honest about. A feeling he had not had since his first year of command, when he had been young enough to encounter genuine uncertainty without the reflex of professional composure immediately overriding it. The feeling of being in a situation that was proceeding according to someone else's plan. The feeling of being, in some essential way, a participant in someone else's story. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, just long enough to decide. Then he opened the channel. "Unknown vessel," he said, and his voice, this time, carried something new. Not weakness, not defeat, not the carefully managed stillness of a man holding fear behind a professional surface. Something harder and more honest than any of those things. The voice of a man who had evaluated the data, reached the conclusion the data required, and was willing to say it out loud. "State your objective." The response came without hesitation, as if it had been waiting, not impatiently, but with the settled certainty of something that had known this question was coming and had simply waited for the right moment. "Commander," the voice said, "we've been waiting for you to ask that." Something shifted on the bridge, not sound, not motion, but a change in the quality of the air itself. Every officer moved fractionally closer to their station. Everyone present, giving everything they had to what came next. This engagement, the voice continued, was never intended to resolve through force. Tyron's jaw tightened. "And yet you engaged our fleet." "No." A pause with no apology in it, and no aggression either. Just clarity. "You engaged us." That landed. Because it was precisely, unanswerably true. They had fired first. They had decided, in the absence of answers, that force would provide them. The voice wasn't accusing, it was correcting. There was a difference. "You entered restricted space," Tyron replied. He said it not as an argument, but as an honest statement of the framework he had been operating within. "You defined it as restricted," the voice said. "We defined it as a route. A route we attempted to navigate through proper channels. We filed 4 formal navigation requests with coalition administrative divisions over the preceding 93 standard days. Each request was declined without review. 93 days. For requests. Tyron held very still. He had not known this. He felt something shift in his chest. Not guilt exactly, but the first tremor of a larger structural realization. The ground of his certainty moving in a way he hadn't felt it move before. The framework he had been operating within developing a crack he hadn't put there. You could have transmitted a formal diplomatic request through military channels, he said. We did, the voice said. Administrative, diplomatic, and navigational. 14 communications across 4 different coalition departments over 93 days. None received a substantive response. Eventually, one side has to choose a different way to be heard. The realization settled across the bridge. Not like a shock, like a tide, slow, inevitable, covering everything it touched. This encounter, the disabled ships, the absorbed strikes, the impossible geometry, hadn't been aggression. It had been a 14th attempt at communication. The only kind they had left. You have our attention, Tyrant said. The words cost him something to say, but he said them clearly. I know, the voice replied. A brief pause. Now we can begin. The silence after that exchange was different from every silence that had preceded it. This one faced forward. This one was oriented toward something rather than away from it. You said this was a meeting, Tyrant said. Yes. And your objective? Mutual access, the voice replied. Safe passage through this corridor in exchange for navigational data your fleet does not currently possess. Detailed surveys of 4 uncharted systems in the outer range beyond current coalition mapping, including one system with confirmed stable planetary bodies and long-range spectral signatures consistent with viable mineral deposits and atmospheric conditions worth studying. We want a route. We can offer considerably more than that in return. Tyron's gaze moved briefly toward the analyst station. The analyst said nothing, but the implication was immediate, and it was substantial. Uncharted systems. Confirmed planetary bodies. Data that coalition deep-range survey teams had spent 3 decades and considerable resources attempting to acquire, pushing further into unmapped space with every expedition and returning with less than they had hoped to find. This ship, this single, impossible ship, was offering them what those expeditions had been searching for. He was still processing this when the alert hit. A sharp tone cut across the bridge, different from the earlier alarm in pitch and urgency. The kind of tone that meant the situation had changed in a way that couldn't be categorized and couldn't wait. New contacts, navigation called out. Multiple, massive signature cluster. FTL exit in progress. Tyron turned instantly. Origin. Outer perimeter, beyond standard sensor range. Signatures still resolving. The display shifted. Space distorted in the particular way it distorted when something very large was crossing the boundary between FTL travel and normal space. Then it resolved. Ships. Not 3. Not 5. Dozens. Count, Tyron snapped. 31 confirmed. Correction, 32. Signatures still stabilizing. The bridge temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Or perhaps it was only Tyron who felt it. Identification. The analyst's voice came back with the professional tightness of someone delivering information they wish they were wrong about. Coalition Reinforcement Fleet. Full combat configuration. Standard assault array. A pause that felt longer than it was. They weren't scheduled. No, sir. Who authorized? They didn't request authorization from this command, sir. Which meant only one thing. Someone above Tyron's clearance level had been monitoring this engagement. Someone had watched 20 minutes of inconclusive contact with an unidentified vessel that had disabled 3 of his ships without causing a single casualty, and had decided that the appropriate response to inconclusive was overwhelming. Someone had looked at this situation and seen a problem that required a larger hammer rather than a different tool entirely. On the main display, the new fleet spread rapidly, 32 warships forming a wide assault pattern as they decelerated from FTL approach. Their configuration not cautious, not analytical, but direct and aggressive and entirely confident. The formation of a force that had never had a reason to question its own conclusions. Tyron's eyes moved between the incoming fleet and the single ship at the center of his formation. The single ship had not moved, had not responded to the new arrivals, had not powered weapons or changed its energy signature in any detectable way. It was still simply waiting. Commander Tyron. A new voice came through the command channel, colder than Tyron's, sharper. carrying authority the way a well-maintained blade carries an edge. This is High Admiral Serac of the Outer Enforcement Division. You are ordered to disengage and fall back immediately. Tyron breathed carefully before responding. Admiral, he said, we are currently in substantive contact with an unidentified vessel that has demonstrated capabilities outside any existing coalition tactical model. The situation has significant diplomatic dimensions that— I've reviewed your transmission logs, Serac interrupted. His voice had the particular certainty of a man who has made his assessment and considers the assessment complete. I've also reviewed your engagement results. 5 ships disabled in 14 minutes. Yes. No fatalities. Yes. Which means you're hesitating. He said it not as an accusation, but as a diagnosis. You're underestimating it, Admiral. No, Serac replied. You're overthinking it. I've reviewed the footage. It's 1 ship. We have 55 vessels in effective engagement range. The math resolves clearly. He was not stupid. Tyron recognized this. Serac was applying the same logic that Tyron himself had applied 20 minutes ago, before the predictive engine had returned nothing and the second strike had charged the enemy's systems, and a single shot at empty space had fragmented 16 ships through their own avoidance protocols. He was operating on the math that had been correct for everything the Coalition had ever faced. The problem was that the math was wrong here, and Tyron knew it, and Serac had not yet had the 20 minutes of direct evidence that made that wrongness undeniable. On the display, the incoming fleet tightened formation. 32 warships, weapons charging, closing at maximum approach velocity. Time to engagement range, approximately 90 seconds. Tyron opened the direct channel to the unknown vessel. Do you see this? He asked. Yes, the calm voice replied immediately. Those ships are not here for a conversation. I'm aware. They will open fire the moment they enter range. Their admiral has made his assessment, and he is committed to it. Does that change anything about your position here? The silence stretched. 60 seconds to contact. 50. 45. The incoming fleet crossed the outer boundary marker. Then, no. One word. Calm as a held breath. Certain as gravity. Without hesitation, without doubt, without a single qualifier that might suggest even a fraction of recalculation. Tyron held the channel open. Are you still in control of this situation? He asked. He needed to hear it. He needed it confirmed. Yes. With 32 additional warships at engagement range? Yes. With a combined fleet of 55 vessels targeting your position? Yes. Across the bridge, no one spoke. Because that answer, delivered 3 times, in exactly the same tone, with the same absolute absence of uncertainty, was the most frightening thing anyone on the Ardent Spear had heard in the entirety of this encounter. Not because it was a threat, because it didn't need to be. Tyron made a decision. Not as a coalition commander following engagement protocol. Not as an officer obeying the chain of command. As someone who had seen something the incoming fleet had not yet seen. Who had 20 minutes of direct evidence that the incoming fleet had not yet been given. And who understood that what you hadn't witnessed yet could determine outcomes just as completely as what you had. All ships, he said over the fleet channel, his voice carrying the particular authority of an order that isn't asking for agreement. Hold fire. Direct order from Commander Tyron, Ardent Spear. Stand down weapons systems across all vessels. A ripple of stunned silence moved through the formation. 23 ships processing a command that contradicted every active directive they were operating under. Commander, one captain asked. That is a direct order. Stand down. All ships. Weapons powered down across 18 vessels. From the command channel, Admiral Serac's voice returned. And this time, beneath the authority and the certainty, there was something else. A note that Tyron recognized as the specific sound of a very confident man encountering an action he hadn't planned for. Tyron, explain what you are doing and explain it now. I'm watching, Admiral, and I'm asking you to do the same. Give it 30 seconds. 32 warships fired. Not in sequence. Not in staggered waves. Not in the deliberate, measured way that coalition doctrine prescribed for engagements with unknowns. All at once. The void didn't light up. It ceased. Energy output on that scale didn't simply illuminate space. It overwhelmed it, saturated every sensor channel simultaneously, consumed the visual spectrum, and then everything beyond it. reduced the universe beyond the viewports to a white total absence that was not brightness but annihilation of information. For 4 full seconds, there was nothing. No tactical data, no sensor readings, no visual confirmation of any kind. The Ardent Spear's crew sat in that absence and waited. Then the readings began to return. The unknown vessel was still there, not drifting, not damaged, not displaced by so much as a detectable unit from the position it had held throughout the entire engagement. Its energy signature, higher than any reading previously recorded, higher than the sum of both absorbed strikes from Tyrant's ships. The absorption data, extrapolated across the new input, described a vessel that was now operating at an effective power level that the entire Ardent Spear formation would have required hours to generate under standard operation. 32 ships had fired everything they had in a single simultaneous discharge, and the result was that the target was now significantly more powerful than it had been before they fired. A silence fell across both fleets. Not tactical silence. Not the silence of commanders waiting for the right moment. The silence of a very large number of people arriving at the same realization at the same moment and having no immediate response to it. "Report," Tyron said quietly. The analyst's voice came back stripped of every layer except the raw data. They didn't just absorb it. They structured it. The incoming energy was distributed across layered conversion systems, taken in, stabilized, stored, and indexed for use. Not randomly. Efficiently. At a conversion rate our instruments cannot currently calculate because the upper boundary of the measurement scale wasn't designed for this outcome. They charged it, someone whispered from across the bridge. The words fell into the silence like something that couldn't be taken back. The channel opened. Same voice. The same voice it had always been, from the first moment to this one. Not triumphant. Not threatening. Not changed in any way by what 32 warships had just delivered. That was a strong opening, it said. A pause. Thank you. And then the unknown vessel moved. Not toward the nearest ship. Not toward the densest cluster. Not toward any target that the tactical overlays could identify as a priority. Toward a point in empty space that held no military significance by any model currently running across 55 coalition vessels. Track that vector, Tyron ordered. It's not targeting anything, Tactical said. I didn't ask what it's targeting. Track it. The ship fired once. At empty space. At the same empty coordinate that a targeting system without context would categorize as a miss before the shot had finished traveling. 16 ships reacted. Not because they were struck, because their predictive threat systems told them they were about to be, flagging the shot as a delayed multi-vector dispersion event and triggering automatic repositioning protocols across more than half the incoming fleet. 16 ships moved simultaneously, each responding to its own system's individual calculation, each making the correct individual decision. And in doing so, fragmenting the formation. 32 ships became 32 separate problems. The unified assault dissolved in under 8 seconds. Not because they were destroyed or disabled, because they had been made to disagree with each other through the specific, targeted use of their own safety protocols. The unknown vessel accelerated into the resulting space. Not between ships, between decisions, threading through the formation with impossible precision, arriving consistently in the spaces that the targeting systems hadn't finished solving for yet, occupying the gaps between calculations rather than the gaps between vessels. Ships fired, missed, adjusted, missed again, because by the time each system arrived at the correct answer, the question had already changed. Then a flash. One shot. Drive systems offline on one ship. No explosion. No visible damage. Another flash. Weapons grid, gone. Another. Navigation, disabled. Each strike taking precisely what it meant to take, and nothing else. Each disabled ship sitting intact in space, its crew unharmed, its hull unmarked, its systems selectively and surgically absent. 11 ships in under 4 minutes. And as the 11th ship went quiet, the vessel brought itself to rest directly in front of the incoming fleet's command ship, not attacking, not threatening, simply positioned. Close enough that any targeting solution on it created an automatic crossfire risk with the flagship. Close enough that the fleet's own safety protocols made firing impossible without the specific override command that only the admiral could give. The flagship's targeting systems locked for exactly half a second. Then the system canceled it. Friendly fire risk. Automatic abort. Without firing a single shot at the command vessel, without making a single direct threat against the flagship or its crew, the unknown vessel had positioned itself so that the fleet's own protective architecture prevented it from acting. It had used the Coalition's doctrine against the Coalition with the precision of something that had read that doctrine thoroughly before arriving. The channel opened. "Admiral," the voice said. No introduction. No identification. Just the word, addressed to Serac directly, across the command channel, as if the question of who was in authority here had resolved itself. "You've seen enough. Across 55 ships, not one weapon discharged. You can continue," the voice said. A pause. "Or you can think." Admiral Serac, to his credit, did not respond immediately. Tyron watched the display, ships drifting, systems offline, formation fractured, weapons silent. One ship at the center of everything, unharmed, unhurried, patient in a way that had long since stopped feeling passive. Tyron found himself thinking about the 14 communications, the 4 navigation requests, the 93 days. He thought about the precision of every disabled ship, the restraint embedded in every single shot. He thought about the way the vessel had returned to the center after its demonstration, the way it had waited there, without pressing the advantage it clearly held. Everything had been calculated. Everything had been chosen. Every disabled ship was a choice not to destroy a ship. Every absorbed strike was a choice not to return fire. Every impossible maneuver through a formation of 55 warships was a choice not to end the formation. The only question remaining, the only question that had ever actually mattered, was whether the people on the other side of this exchange were capable of understanding what had been chosen for them and choosing something in return. From the command channel, Serac's voice came through, quieter than before, stripped of the absolute, unexamined certainty it had carried when he arrived. "Tyron." "Yes, Admiral." A pause. 7 seconds. Tyron counted them. "Brief me." Tyron looked at the display for one more long moment. Then he began. The negotiation that followed was the shortest formal engagement dialogue in Coalition recorded history. Captain Varn spoke for 11 minutes. He outlined terms without leverage and without theater. Safe passage through the corridor in both directions, for vessels registered under their navigation authority, with agreed transit protocols and a 30-day notification window for scheduling. In return, the complete navigational survey of 4 outer-range systems, including precise stellar cartography, confirmed planetary body data, and atmospheric and mineral composition profiles for the most promising candidate world. Data that Coalition deep-range survey teams had been attempting to locate and acquire for 31 years, pushing further into unmapped space with diminishing returns on every expedition. He did not threaten. He did not refer to the disabled ships, the absorbed strikes, or the 11 vessels currently sitting silent in space around them. He did not need to. Every officer in both fleets had witnessed it. The data was already in the logs. The ships with their systems offline were visible in real time on every display across 55 bridges. When Varn finished, Admiral Serac was quiet. 7 seconds. Then, agreed. Terms accepted. No negotiation. No counteroffer. No demand for additional consideration. Just 2 words, delivered with the clean precision of someone who had completed a calculation and arrived at the only answer that made sense. 3 days later, the Coalition High Council ratified the agreement without revision or amendment. The senior council member who filed the ratification document added a notation to the formal record, unusually detailed for a routine filing, observing that this was the first treaty concluded in 40 years without a single Coalition fatality, without a single enemy vessel destroyed, and with a net intelligence gain from the navigational data that exceeded the assessed strategic value of the corridor itself by a margin the notation described as considerable, and then, in a second revision, changed to significant. The council member did not record their personal feelings about the encounter, but the care with which the notation had been written suggested they had them, and that the feelings were complicated. Commander Tyron submitted his full engagement report 72 hours after the encounter concluded. He was thorough, the absorption data, the targeting anomalies, the sequential disabling pattern, the fragmentation of the reinforcement fleet in under 8 seconds from a single shot at empty space. He documented everything with the precision of an officer who understood that what had occurred in that corridor would be analyzed in coalition tactical academies for years, and that the analysis would only be as good as the record he provided. He included the data on the 4 navigation requests. He included the timeline of 14 unanswered communications. He included it without editorial comment, as simple fact, the way he would include any other relevant data. On the final page, below the technical summary, below the engagement timeline and the casualty report, 0 coalition fatalities, 0 enemy fatalities, he wrote a single line. They did not defeat us. They removed the need to fight. He stared at that line for a long time before he filed the report. Then he filed it. Far from coalition space, moving along a corridor that was no longer restricted, the Axiom Veil continued on its original course. Unescorted, unchallenged. The stars ahead of it, the same stars it had been navigating toward before any of this began, before the 23 ships, before the Second Fleet, before the 14 communications, and the 93 days, and everything that had followed from the Coalition's decision not to respond to them. On the bridge, Captain Elias Varn reached across the console. He adjusted his cup, still perfectly aligned. "Navigation," he said, calmly, unhurriedly, in exactly the tone of a man for whom what had just occurred was not an emergency, but a detour, not an escalation, but a conversation that had needed to happen and now had. Next corridor. A pause. "Yes, Captain." The ship moved, and behind it, written in disabled drive arrays and silent weapons systems, and the memory of every crew member across 55 ships who had come to that corridor ready for something that had turned out to be something else entirely. A lesson that no training simulation, no tactical database, no accumulated centuries of coalition engagement history had ever found a way to teach. That the most complete victory is the one that leaves the other side with nothing to mourn. That the most dangerous force in any encounter is not the one that destroys. It is the one that has already decided, before the first shot is fired, that it doesn't need to. That sometimes, the most decisive victory looks nothing like a war. And that the ships we remember longest are not the ones that won by breaking things, but the ones that won by being impossible to break.